I was sitting on the cold bathroom tiles, knees pulled tight against my chest, and my breathing came in broken gasps like someone had their hands wrapped around my throat. This morning my promotion had been cancelled. The position I'd worked night after night for, the position that was supposed to help me pay for my mother's medication, all of it, stripped away with a single email. My eyes were closed, but the tears wouldn't stop. I'd hidden here because showing weakness in this company meant losing your place, your footing, everything you'd fought to build. Then a voice came, soft, smooth, and completely unbothered. Forgot to lock the bathroom door. My heart stopped cold. My head snapped up, and there he was, Grayson Knight, my CEO, my boss, the man I'd only ever watched from a distance across crowded conference rooms. His blue eyes were looking at me, not surprised, not angry, just quietly aware, like he'd stumbled upon something fragile he hadn't expected to find. I tried to stand, turning my face away, hiding the evidence of my breakdown. "I am sorry, sir. I'm leaving right now." My voice was shaking, trembling with every syllable, and I knew he could hear it, could see right through the thin mask I was desperately trying to hold together. But he didn't step aside. He didn't move at all. "Stay." One word, just one, and it pinned me to the ground like gravity had doubled its weight. My heartbeat sped up, hammering against my ribs as he moved closer, unbuttoning his coat like he was in his private office and not an abandoned bathroom where I'd come to fall apart. "What's your name?" His voice was flat, cold, but somehow, for reasons I couldn't explain, it didn't feel intimidating. It felt safe, like he was asking because he genuinely wanted to know, not because he had to. "Carter," I whispered, barely able to get the word out. "Carter Hayes." "Carter." He said my name like it was the first time he'd ever acknowledged my existence, like I'd suddenly become real to him in this broken moment. Then he crouched down, coming to my level, and gave me his full, undivided attention. "If you even think about leaving this building, I'll personally drag you back myself." My mouth fell open. "What?" His gaze was still serious, unwavering, and I couldn't tell if this was a threat or some twisted form of protection. What did he want from me? Why was he even here? "I've seen your reports," he continued, his tone measured and deliberate. "I've seen how you handle data, how you manage your team, how you solve problems no one else can touch. And I also saw exactly why you didn't get that promotion." His last sentence came out slow, calculated, like he'd been holding on to this information, waiting for the right moment to use it. My heart dropped. He knew what had happened, knew about the politics, the favoritism, the way I'd been pushed aside. Then he loosened his tie slightly and looked straight into my eyes, and the intensity there nearly knocked the air from my lungs. "You're not alone anymore, Carter." I couldn't speak. I couldn't even process what he was saying because none of this made sense. He stood up smoothly, moving toward the door. But before leaving, he paused, glancing back at me one last time. "Tomorrow, 8 a.m. My office. Don't be late." And then he was gone, just like that, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just turned my entire world upside down with a handful of sentences. But my heartbeat, it was still racing, pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the door he'd walked through, trying to understand what had just happened. Grayson Knight, the untouchable CEO who never spoke to lower-level employees, who ran this company with an iron fist and zero tolerance for weakness, had just found me crying on a bathroom floor, and instead of firing me, instead of looking at me with disgust or pity, he'd told me I wasn't alone. What did that even mean? Why would someone like him care about someone like me? I finally pulled myself up, wiping my face with shaking hands, and caught my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were red and swollen, my hair a mess, my shirt wrinkled from where I'd been clutching my knees. I looked exactly like what I was. Someone who was barely holding it together, someone who was one bad day away from completely breaking. But something had shifted. Something had changed in that bathroom. In those few minutes when Grayson had looked at me like I mattered, like my pain wasn't something to be ignored or dismissed. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand him. But as I walked out of that bathroom and back toward my desk, trying to act like nothing had happened, I couldn't stop replaying his words in my head. "You're not alone anymore, Carter." It felt like a promise. It felt like a lifeline, and I didn't know whether to be terrified or relieved. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I went through the motions, answering emails, finishing reports, pretending like my world hadn't just been completely upended. But every time I glanced toward the executive floor, every time I thought about that meeting tomorrow morning, my stomach twisted with anxiety, and something else I couldn't quite name. What did he want from me? What was going to happen in that office? By the time I left the building that evening, the sun had already set, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cool night air, trying to calm the storm of thoughts racing through my mind. Tomorrow would come whether I was ready or not. Tomorrow I would walk into Grayson Knight's office and find out exactly what he meant by those words. And somehow, despite all the fear and confusion, despite everything that had gone wrong today, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt hope. Small, fragile, barely there, but real. Because for the first time in months, someone had seen me, really seen me, not just as an employee, not just as a number on a spreadsheet, but as a person who was struggling, who was hurting, who needed someone to tell them they weren't alone. And that someone had been Grayson Knight. I walked toward the bus stop, hands shoved deep in my pockets, and let myself imagine what tomorrow might bring. Whatever it was, whatever he wanted, I would face it. Because after today, after that moment in the bathroom, I realized something important. I was tired of being invisible. I was tired of breaking in silence. And maybe, just maybe, Grayson Knight was offering me a way out. The next morning I stood outside his office door, adjusting my shirt for the third time in as many minutes. My heart was pounding so loudly I was convinced everyone on the floor could hear it, could see the way my hands were trembling slightly as I raised one to knock. I'd been trying to convince myself all morning that this was just a normal meeting, that yesterday had been some kind of fever dream, that Grayson Knight hadn't actually found me crying on a bathroom floor and then promised me I wasn't alone. But his words kept echoing in my head, refusing to let me pretend this was nothing. "You're not alone anymore, Carter." What did that mean? What did he want from me? I took a deep breath and knocked. "Come in." His voice was calmer than yesterday, more controlled, like he'd had time to compose himself overnight. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. His office was so quiet I could hear my own breathing, could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on my shoulder. He was sitting behind his desk, a file open in front of him, but the moment I entered, his gaze lifted and locked onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Sit." He gestured toward the chair across from him. I sat down hesitantly, hands clasped tightly in my lap, trying to keep them from shaking. He watched me for a long moment, saying nothing, and I felt like I was being examined, studied, analyzed in ways I couldn't begin to understand. Then he closed the file and leaned back in his chair. "Your manager, Eleanor Reed, has been blocking your promotion because she wants to give that position to her nephew." My mouth fell open. He was just saying it out loud. No corporate speak, no dancing around the issue, just straight facts delivered with brutal honesty. "It's political, Carter, and I don't allow that kind of corruption in my company. So I'm transferring you directly to my team." My brain completely short-circuited. I couldn't process what he was saying because it didn't make sense. None of this made any sense at all. "I'm sorry, sir, what?" He stood up from his chair and moved to sit on the edge of his desk, now only a few feet away from me. And suddenly the office felt much smaller, much more intimate. His presence was overwhelming, commanding, and I had to force myself to keep breathing normally. "You'll be working on my team. Direct reporting. Every single day, you'll be right here in front of me." His eyes hadn't left mine, hadn't even blinked. "And if you ever hide in a bathroom to cry again," he paused, letting the words hang in the air, "I'll find you before you even get the chance." This wasn't a joke. There was no humor in his voice, no playfulness in his expression, just pure absolute certainty, like he was making me a promise he fully intended to keep. I tried to pull myself together, tried to make sense of this impossible situation. "Sir, I don't understand. Why are you helping me like this?" He was silent for a moment, and I watched as his jaw tightened, like he was fighting some internal battle with himself, trying to decide how much truth to reveal. "Because yesterday was the first time in years that you made me feel human." My heart stopped. He looked at me then, not with a smile, not with softness, but with something raw and real in his eyes, something vulnerable that I never expected to see from someone like him. "I'm not keeping you here out of pity, Carter. I'm keeping you here because you deserve this position. Because you're talented and hardworking and everything this company should value. And because, he paused again and I could see him wrestling with the words. Because I can't stand the thought of watching you break apart again. I was frozen, completely paralyzed. I had no idea what to say, how to respond to this confession that felt too intimate, too personal for a professional conversation between a CEO and an employee. He stood up and adjusted his tie, smoothly transitioning back into business mode like he hadn't just completely shattered my understanding of reality. Your desk will be moved by tomorrow. Welcome to my team, Carter. He extended his hand toward me. I stood up on shaky legs and reached out to shake it, but his grip was firm and warm, and he held on just a fraction too long enough for me to notice. Long enough for the touch to mean something more than just a professional handshake. When I finally left his office, my entire body was trembling. Because I still couldn't tell if this was real or if I was dreaming. Couldn't understand why someone like Grayson Knight would care so much about someone like me. But as I walked back to my desk, I realized something. For the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel worthless. I felt seen, and it was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The rest of the day passed in a strange haze. People kept glancing at me, whispering when they thought I couldn't hear, clearly wondering why I'd been called into the CEO's office, and what it meant. Eleanor passed by my desk once, her expression cold and hostile, but she didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I could see the anger in her eyes, the resentment that I'd somehow bypassed her authority and gone straight to the top. But I didn't care. For once in my life, I didn't care what she thought, didn't care about office politics or petty revenge. Because Grayson Knight had chosen me. He'd seen something in me worth protecting, worth fighting for, and that knowledge filled me with a strength I hadn't felt in years. By the time I packed up my things that evening, I was exhausted but strangely energized, my mind racing with possibilities and questions and 1,000 different emotions I couldn't begin to name. As I headed toward the elevator, I caught a glimpse of Grayson's office through the glass walls. He was still there, still working, his profile illuminated by the soft glow of his computer screen. And for just a moment he looked up, and our eyes met across the distance. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just held my gaze for 3 long seconds, and in that brief connection I felt something pass between us. Understanding maybe. Recognition, or perhaps just the acknowledgement that something had changed. That we'd crossed some invisible line yesterday in that bathroom, and there was no going back now. I stepped into the elevator and watched the doors close, cutting off my view of him. And as I descended toward the lobby, toward the outside world and my tiny apartment and my complicated, messy life, I couldn't stop thinking about tomorrow, about working on his team, about seeing him every single day, about the way he'd looked at me and said, "You're not alone anymore." Whatever this was, whatever was happening between us, I was ready to find out. 2 weeks had passed since I joined Grayson's team, and my life had transformed in ways I never could have anticipated. I now sat across from him every day, building reports, attending high-level meetings, and working late nights when everyone else had gone home. He spoke to me constantly about work, about projects, about strategies and goals. But sometimes we just existed in comfortable silence, the kind that felt more intimate than words ever could. But tonight was different. I was packing up my bag, getting ready to catch the late bus home, when his voice cut through the quiet office. "Carter." I turned around. He was putting on his coat, already prepared to leave, looking every bit the powerful CEO he was. "Do you need a ride? Your apartment is pretty far from here." My heart started racing again, that familiar flutter I'd learned to associate with his presence. "Sir, I can catch the bus. Your bus doesn't come for another hour," he said calmly, matter-of-factly, like he'd memorized my schedule without me even realizing it. "And standing out there alone this late isn't smart." He started walking toward the elevator without waiting for my response. And what choice did I have? I grabbed my bag and followed him. His car was a sleek black sedan, obviously expensive, the kind of vehicle I'd only ever seen in magazines or movies. When I slid into the passenger seat, I immediately noticed the subtle scent of his cologne. Clean, sharp, sophisticated, exactly like him. The drive started quietly. Outside, city lights blurred past the windows, but inside there was only the sound of our breathing, the soft hum of the engine and the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. Then suddenly he asked, "Have you eaten?" I was confused by the question. Yes, sir. I had lunch, dinner, my mouth went dry. Because the truth was I couldn't afford a second meal most days. Couldn't justify spending money on food when I had rent to pay and my mother's medication to buy and 1,000 other expenses constantly crushing me. He noticed my silence. Of course he did. He noticed everything about me. Every detail, every hesitation, every moment of vulnerability I tried to hide. Without saying anything, he changed direction, turning the car down a different street. "Sir, where are we?" "My place." My heart dropped into my stomach. He wasn't looking at me, but his hands were gripping the steering wheel tightly, knuckles slightly white. "I'm not letting you go home hungry, Carter." His penthouse was minimalist and breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling glass walls, dark furniture with clean lines and a view that overlooked the entire city like we were floating above the world. I stood frozen just inside the doorway, completely overwhelmed and unsure what to do with myself. He removed his jacket and headed straight for the kitchen. "Sit." I hesitantly lowered myself onto the sofa, watching as he moved around the kitchen with surprising ease. He wasn't cooking like a professional chef, but his movements were smooth and confident as he boiled water, prepared pasta, heated sauce. A few minutes later, he brought 2 plates over and sat down across from me. "Eat." My hand was shaking slightly as I picked up the fork. This was so simple, just pasta, but to me it felt enormous, overwhelming, like he was offering me something far more significant than just food. I took the first bite and the taste was so fresh, so perfectly seasoned, that my eyes closed involuntarily. "How is it?" His voice was low, careful, like my opinion actually mattered to him. I looked up at him and saw genuine concern in his expression, saw that he was actually worried about whether I liked it or not. "It's really good, sir." He relaxed slightly, just slightly. Then he said, "Just Grayson. When we're here, don't call me sir." Heat rushed to my face. He'd been calling me by my first name from the beginning, but now he was sharing his own, crossing that professional boundary, making this feel dangerously personal. We continued eating and slowly conversation began. Small things at first. His first job out of college, his struggles climbing the corporate ladder, his loneliness at the top. I just listened, absorbing every detail because for the first time Grayson Knight felt truly human to me. Not just an untouchable CEO but an actual person with pain and history and scars like everyone else. Then he leaned forward, elbows resting on the table and his focus zeroed in on me completely. "You know your smile is incredibly rare." My heart clenched. "I smile." "No," he said seriously, shaking his head. "You give people fake smiles. Polite smiles. Professional smiles. But a real one? I've only seen it once. When you finally solved that Excel problem that had been bothering you for days." My throat went completely dry. He'd been watching me that closely, noticing details that small, paying attention to the difference between my real emotions and the masks I wore every single day. He looked into my eyes, and this time he was close. So close I could see the flecks of gray in his blue irises. "I want to see your real smile more often, Carter." My breathing stopped, because this wasn't about work anymore. This wasn't professional concern or corporate strategy. This was something else entirely. Something raw and honest and terrifying. The air between us felt charged, electric, like something was about to break or shift, or change forever. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to respond to this intensity, this attention, this care that felt too big for me to handle. So I just sat there, frozen, staring back at him while my heart hammered against my ribs. He finally pulled back, breaking the moment, and stood up to clear the plates. But the tension didn't disappear. It lingered in the space between us, in every glance, every accidental brush of hands, as we cleaned up together. When everything was done, he turned to me. "It's late. You should stay here tonight. I can go home." "No." His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. "Not in your current state. Not alone." He showed me to the guest room, gave me clean clothes to change into, made sure I had everything I needed. But as I lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the evening, the car ride, the dinner, the way he'd looked at me and said he wanted to see my real smile. What was happening between us? What did any of this mean? Around 2 in the morning, I got up to get water and found him still awake, sitting on the couch with his laptop, working even at this ungodly hour. "Can't sleep?" he asked without looking up. "Could ask you the same thing." He smiled slightly, actually smiled, and it transformed his entire face, made him look younger, softer, more vulnerable. "I don't sleep much, too many thoughts." "About what?" "About whether I'm doing the right thing." He finally looked at me. "About whether I'm crossing lines I shouldn't cross. About whether you feel safe here, or if I'm making you uncomfortable." I sat down on the other end of the couch. "I feel safe." And I meant it. Despite everything, despite how confusing and intense this all was, I genuinely felt safer with Grayson Knight than I had anywhere else in years. He nodded slowly, accepting my answer, and we sat there in comfortable silence until I finally felt tired enough to try sleeping again. As I headed back to the guest room, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. He was watching me, his expression unreadable but his eyes full of something I couldn't quite name. And I realized with sudden startling clarity that my life had changed irreversibly the moment he'd found me crying in that bathroom. There was no going back now. Whatever this was, whatever we were becoming, I was already too deep to turn away. The next morning, the office felt different. Strange. Like everyone could sense that something had shifted but couldn't quite figure out what. I was sitting at my desk, trying to focus on the quarterly report in front of me, when I heard her voice sharp, cutting through the ambient noise like a knife. "Carter." Eleanor, my former manager, stood beside my desk with fury blazing in her eyes. Her arms were crossed, her posture rigid, and I could practically feel the anger radiating off her in waves. "My office, now." It wasn't a request. It was a command, delivered with all the authority she thought she still had over me. I stood up slowly, my stomach twisting with anxiety, and followed her down the hallway. Every step felt heavier than the last. When we entered her office, she slammed the door shut behind us with enough force to make me flinch. "How did you do it?" She was practically shouting now, her professional mask completely abandoned. "Grayson Knight's team? What kind of deal did you make with him?" My mouth fell open in shock. There was no deal. Don't lie to me." She stepped closer, jabbing her finger toward my chest accusingly. "You must have done something. People like you don't just get transferred to the CEO's personal team without giving something in return. So what was it? What did you offer him?" The implication in her words hit me like a physical blow, and I felt heat rush to my face, not from embarrassment but from pure anger. How dare she suggest that I'd compromised myself, that I'd traded favors or manipulated my way into this position? I opened my mouth to defend myself, to tell her exactly how wrong she was. But before I could get a single word out, the door flew open, and there he was, Grayson Knight, standing in the doorway like an avenging angel, his blue eyes ablaze with a cold fury I'd never seen before. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees instantly. "Miss Reed." His voice was so cold, so controlled and dangerous that the entire room seemed to freeze around us. Eleanor's face went pale as she took an instinctive step backward. "Miss Knight, I was just, your unprofessional behavior has been documented and reported to HR." He spoke with deadly calm, each word precisely delivered like the strike of a hammer. "If you make any further personal contact with Carter, if you speak to him, if you so much as look at him wrong, I will personally handle your termination. Am I making myself clear?" He stared directly into her eyes, unflinching, and I watched as all the color drained from her face. She looked like she wanted to say something, wanted to defend herself or make excuses, but no words came out. After a long, terrible moment of silence, she simply nodded and walked out of the office, her shoulders hunched in defeat. Grayson turned to me, and I could see his jaw was still tight with barely controlled anger. "Did she say anything else to you before I got here?" I was shaking, trembling from the confrontation and from the shock of watching Grayson defend me so fiercely, but I managed to shake my head. "I'm fine, sir." "Grayson," he corrected immediately, his voice softening just slightly. Then his hand was on my shoulder, warm and steady, and I had to hold my breath because his proximity, his scent, his touch, all of it was completely overwhelming my senses. "If anyone treats you like that again, if anyone makes you feel uncomfortable or unsafe, you tell me immediately." "Understood." I could only nod because words had completely abandoned me. The way he was looking at me, the protective intensity in his eyes, the firmness of his grip on my shoulder, it all felt too intimate, too personal for a simple professional relationship. He started to leave, heading toward the door, but paused right at the threshold and glanced back at me. "There's a late meeting tonight, I'll drive you home afterward." It wasn't a suggestion or an offer. It was a statement of fact, a decision he'd already made on my behalf. And I didn't even think about refusing. The rest of the day passed in a blur of work and whispered conversations as word spread about what had happened in Eleanor's office. I could feel people's eyes on me, could sense their curiosity and speculation, but I kept my head down and focused on my tasks. When evening finally arrived, Grayson and I left the building together, walking side by side through the empty parking garage. Suddenly, without any warning, the world tilted sideways. My vision blurred at the edges, going fuzzy and unfocused, and I felt my knees start to buckle. I reached out blindly and managed to catch myself against the wall, pressing my palm flat against the cold concrete to keep from falling. "Carter?" Grayson was beside me instantly, his arms coming around me to steady me, to hold me upright. "What's wrong? What happened?" I tried to shake my head, tried to tell him I was fine, but the words wouldn't come out properly. "Just dizzy. I'm okay." His eyes scanned my face, and I watched as his expression shifted from concern to something harder, something almost angry. "Did you eat anything today?" The silence that followed was answer enough. He exhaled sharply, and I could see him fighting to control his frustration. Then, without saying another word, he bent down and scooped me up into his arms, literally lifted me off the ground like I weighed nothing, and started walking toward his car. "Sir Grayson, I can walk. I don't need. Be quiet." His voice was low but absolutely firm, leaving no room for argument. My face was pressed against his chest, and I could feel his heartbeat, strong and steady beneath my cheek. And despite my embarrassment, despite my protests, I found myself relaxing into his hold, because this kind of protective care, this overwhelming concern for my well-being, nobody had ever shown me anything like it before. Nobody had ever made me feel like I mattered this much. He carried me all the way to his car, setting me down gently in the passenger seat and buckling my seatbelt himself before closing the door. As we drove away from the office, I kept stealing glances at him, trying to understand why he was doing all of this. Why someone as powerful and important as Grayson Knight would care so much about someone as insignificant as me. But every time I opened my mouth to ask, the words died in my throat. Because maybe, just maybe, I was afraid of what the answer might be. Afraid that if I questioned it too much, this entire beautiful, impossible dream would shatter and I'd wake up alone again. So instead, I just sat there in silence, watching the city lights blur past the window, and let myself feel safe for once in my life. Grayson drove straight to his penthouse, and this time there was no calm composure, no measured control. He was frustrated with me, with the situation, maybe with himself. He helped me onto the sofa and immediately went to get water from the kitchen, then started preparing what looked like a proper, substantial meal. "You don't take care of yourself." His words were directed at the stove, not at me, but I could hear the emotion beneath them. "This can't continue, Carter. It just can't. I can't afford 2 meals every day," I whispered, my voice so quiet I wasn't even sure he'd hear it. But he did. He went completely still, his hand frozen in the middle of stirring the sauce. Then slowly, so slowly, he turned to face me, and there was something burning in his eyes, something intense and almost painful to look at. "Then ask me." My heart stopped beating. "What? If you need something, anything at all, you ask me for it. Money, food, help with bills, whatever you need." He crossed the distance between us and dropped to his knees in front of me, bringing himself to my level so we were face to face, eye to eye. "I can't watch you struggle like this anymore." I was completely speechless. Tears were building in my eyes, and I tried desperately to hold them back, to maintain some shred of dignity, but one escaped and rolled down my cheek before I could stop it. "And Grayson," he reached up and wiped it away with his thumb, so gently it nearly broke me completely. "Please," he said softly, and I'd never heard him sound so vulnerable before. "Please stop burning yourself out for everyone else. Stop sacrificing your own well-being. Just let me help you." I leaned into his touch without thinking, letting my face rest in his palm for just a moment. just this one stolen moment of comfort and connection. He cupped my face with both hands and pressed his forehead against mine, our breaths mingling in the small space between us. "You're not alone anymore." Those words again. The same ones he'd said in that bathroom, the same promise he kept making. But this time they felt more real, more solid, more true than ever before. I started crying in earnest then, quiet sobs that I couldn't control, and he just stayed there with me, holding me, grounding me, letting me fall apart without judgment or shame. After I'd cried myself out and felt empty and raw but somehow lighter, he made me eat everything on the plate he'd prepared, watching me carefully to make sure I finished every bite. Then he said, "You're staying here tonight. I can go home, I'll be—" "No." His voice was strict, uncompromising. "Not in your current condition. I'm not letting you go back to an empty apartment where nobody will know if something happens to you." He started to lead me toward the guest room, but I hesitated, my feet refusing to move in that direction. Can I stay out here instead? In the living room?" His expression softened immediately, understanding something I hadn't even voiced. He didn't question it, didn't make me explain. He just nodded and brought me a blanket, setting me up on the sofa with pillows and making sure I was comfortable. "Get some sleep," he said quietly. "I'll be right here." I lay down and closed my eyes, exhausted beyond measure, and slowly drifted into an uneasy sleep. But somewhere in the middle of the night I woke up suddenly, my internal alarm going off for no reason I could identify. And when I opened my eyes, I saw him. Grayson was sitting on the floor right beside the sofa, his back leaning against it, his laptop open on his thighs, casting a soft blue glow across his features. He hadn't gone to bed. He hadn't left alone even for a moment. He was just there, watching over me like some kind of silent guardian. "Grayson?" I whispered into the darkness. He looked up immediately, closing his laptop. "Did I wake you?" "I'm sorry, I was trying to be quiet." "No, I didn't know how to finish that sentence." "Why aren't you sleeping?" "I wanted to make sure you were okay," he said simply, like it was the most natural thing in the world to give up his own comfort to sit on the floor all night. "You looked restless earlier. I thought you might wake up and be disoriented." Something in my chest tightened painfully. Nobody had ever cared about me like this. Nobody had ever put my needs so far above their own. "You don't have to do this," I told him, even though I desperately wanted him to stay. "You should sleep in your own bed. I'm exactly where I want to be." His voice was firm, leaving no room for debate. Then softer, almost hesitant. "Unless you want me to leave? If I'm making you uncomfortable?" "No." The word came out too fast, too desperate. "No, please, Tay. I don't want you to be uncomfortable because of me." He smiled then, just a small curve of his lips, but it transformed his entire face. "I've slept in worse places for worse reasons. Trust me, this is fine." He shifted slightly, getting more comfortable against the sofa. "Go back to sleep, Carter. I'll be right here." And somehow, with him there beside me, with his quiet presence filling the space and making it feel less empty, I did fall back asleep. But this time it was peaceful, deep and dreamless. When I finally woke up several hours later, early morning light was just starting to filter through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Grayson was still there, though now his laptop was closed and his head was tilted back against the sofa cushion. His eyes finally shut in what looked like an uncomfortable but much-needed rest. I watched him for a long moment, studying the strong lines of his face, the way his usually severe expression had softened in sleep, and I realized something that terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. I was falling for him. Maybe I'd already fallen. Maybe I'd been falling since that first moment in the bathroom when he'd looked at me and told me I wasn't alone. And the scariest part was, I didn't want to stop. When Grayson finally woke up, the first thing he did was look for me, his eyes scanning the room until they found me sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee I'd made. He smiled, actually smiled, and it was small and brief but completely genuine. "Good morning." My heart did a little flip in my chest. "Morning." We had breakfast together in comfortable silence, the kind that felt natural and easy rather than awkward or forced. But as we were getting ready to leave for the office, Grayson suddenly caught my wrist, stopping me in my tracks and turning me to face him. "Carter." His expression had shifted to something more serious, more intense. "I need to ask you something." My heartbeat immediately accelerated, pounding hard against my ribs. Okay. What if? He paused, seeming to struggle with the words, which was unusual for someone normally so articulate and confident. What if I asked you to move in here? Permanently. My mouth fell open. I couldn't have heard that right. What? He took a deep breath, and I could see him steeling himself, preparing for something. I mean it. Move in with me. You're struggling with rent and bills, worrying about money constantly, and I have more than enough space here. But more than that, more than just the practical reasons, I want you here. I want you close to me. This felt like more than just an offer of convenience or charity. This felt like something bigger, something that would fundamentally change the nature of our relationship. Grayson, I'm in love with you, Carter. The words hit me like a physical force, stealing all the air from my lungs. I stood there frozen, completely unable to process what I'd just heard. He loved me. He was in love with me. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again they were filled with such raw honesty it nearly broke me. From the first moment I saw you crying in that bathroom, you haven't left my mind. Not for a single day. Your laugh, your struggles, the way you try so hard to stay strong even when you're breaking inside. All of it. Every part of you. I don't want to lose you. I can't lose you. Tears were streaming down my face before I even realized I was crying. Because nobody had ever said anything like this to me before. Nobody had ever looked at me the way Grayson was looking at me right now, like I was precious. Like I was important. Like I was worth fighting for. I love you too, I whispered, the words tumbling out before I could second-guess them or talk myself out of being vulnerable. I think I've been falling in love with you since that first night when you made me dinner. When you told me I wasn't alone. Maybe even before that. His smile was brilliant, transforming his usually serious face into something beautiful and unguarded. Then he pulled me into his arms, holding me tight against his chest, and I wrapped my arms around him in return, clinging to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that kept trying to knock me down. We stood there for a long moment, just holding each other, letting the reality of what we'd just confessed sink in. So will you? He murmured into my hair. Will you stay with me? Permanently. I pulled back just enough to look up at him, to see the hope and fear and love all mixed together in his eyes. Yes. The word came out steady and sure, without any hesitation. Yes. I'll stay. He kissed my forehead then, soft and reverent, and I felt something in my chest settle into place, like a puzzle piece finally finding where it belonged. We should probably get to work, I said eventually, though I made no move to actually leave his embrace. He laughed quietly. We're already late. A few more minutes won't matter. So we stayed there, wrapped up in each other, letting the morning sun stream through the windows and paint us both in gold. When we finally did make it to the office, everything felt different. The same desk, the same computer, the same stacks of paperwork, but somehow it all meant something else now. Because I wasn't alone anymore. I had someone in my corner, someone who saw me and valued me and wanted me to stay. Throughout the day, I caught Grayson watching me from across the room during meetings. His expression soft in a way I'd never seen before. And every time our eyes met, I felt that same flutter of warmth and belonging that had been growing steadily since that night in the bathroom. During lunch he came to find me and we ate together in his office, with the door closed, talking about everything and nothing. Plans for moving my things into his place, which closet space I could use, whether I preferred the left or right side of the bed. Practical conversations about a future we were building together, brick by brick. Are you scared? He asked me at one point, setting down his fork and looking at me seriously. About us? About moving this fast? I thought about it carefully before answering. A little, I admit. This is all happening so quickly. 2 weeks ago I didn't even think you knew my name. And now we're planning to live together, he finished. I know it's fast, but I also know what I want. And I want you, Carter. Every day. Every morning when I wake up and every night before I sleep. I want all of it. I want that too, I told him honestly. It's terrifying and overwhelming and probably crazy, but I want it. I want you. He reached across the table and took my hand, threading our fingers together. Then we'll figure it out together. We'll take it one day at a time, and if it ever becomes too much, if you ever need space or time to think, you tell me. Okay? Okay. We finished lunch and went back to work. But the knowledge of what waited for us after work, a home we'd share, a life we were building together made everything feel lighter somehow. When evening finally came and we left the office together, walking to his car side by side, Grayson suddenly stopped and turned to me. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For letting me in, for trusting me, for staying." He cupped my face gently. "For being exactly who you are." I smiled then, a real smile, the kind he'd said he wanted to see more of, and kissed him softly. "Thank you for finding me that day. For seeing me when I thought I was invisible." "You were never invisible to me," he said seriously. "Never." And as we drove toward his penthouse, toward our home, I realized that for the first time in my entire life, I actually believed I deserved to be happy, that I deserved to be loved, that I deserved this beautiful, impossible second chance at life that Grayson was offering me, and I was going to hold on to it with everything I had.